often loud minority voice. Once you tune into this voice, you quickly learn just how persistent and vociferous it can be. And the voice is being heard loud and clear in some places. Even a quick internet search reveals how influential such radical skepticism has been in the past, and how rapidly it is spreading, even now. For decades, it was the dominant view in countries such as the Soviet Union. Yet, more striking, it appears to be the majority view in some regions of the West today, including some parts of Scandinavia. The authors of this skeptical literature understand themselves to be mythicists, that is, those who believe that Jesus is a myth. Rarely do mythicists define what they mean by the term myth, a failure that strikes real scholars of religion as both unfortunate and highly problematic, since in technical scholarship the term has come to mean many things over the years. When mythicists use the term, they often seem to mean simply a story that has no historical basis, a history-like narrative that in fact did not happen. In this sense, Jesus is a myth because even though there are plenty of ancient stories about him, they are not historical. His life and teachings were invented by early storytellers. He never really lived. Those who do not think Jesus existed are frequently militant in their views and remarkably adept at countering evidence that, to the rest of the civilized world, seems compelling and even unanswerable. But these writers have answers, and the smart ones among them need to be taken seriously, if for no other reason than to show why they cannot be right about their major contention. The reality is that whatever else you may think about Jesus, he certainly did exist. That is what this book will set out to demonstrate. I hardly need to stress what I have already intimated. The view that Jesus existed is held by virtually every expert on the planet. That in itself is not proof, of course. Expert opinion is, at the end of the day, still opinion. But why would you not want to know what experts have to say? When you make a dental appointment, do you want your dentist to be an expert or not? If you build a house, do you want a professional architect or your next-door neighbor to draw up the plans? One might be tempted to say that in the case of the historical Jesus it is different, since, after all, we are just talking about history. Experts have no more access to the past than anyone else. That, however, is simply not true. It may be the case that some of my students receive the bulk of their knowledge of the Middle Ages from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but is that really the best place to turn? So too, millions of people have acquired their knowledge about early Christianity, about Jesus, Mary Magdalene, the Emperor Constantine, the Council of Nicaea, from Dan Brown, author of the aforementioned The Da Vinci Code. But at the end of the day, is that such a wise choice? Serious historians of the early Christian movement, all of them, have spent many years preparing to be experts in their field. Just to read the ancient sources requires expertise in a range of ancient languages: Greek, Hebrew, Latin, and often Aramaic, Syriac, and Coptic. Not to mention the modern languages of scholarship, for example, German and French. And that is just for starters. Expertise requires years of patiently examining ancient texts and a thorough grounding in the history and culture of Greek and Roman antiquity, the religions of the ancient Mediterranean world, both pagan and Jewish, knowledge of the history of the Christian Church, and the development of its social life and theology, and, well, lots of other things. It is striking that virtually everyone who has spent all the years needed to attain these qualifications is convinced that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical figure. Again, this is not a piece of evidence, but if nothing else it should give one pause. In the field of biology, evolution may be just a theory, as some politicians painfully point out, but it is the theory subscribed to, for good reason, by every real scientist in every established university in the Western world. Still, as is clear from the avalanche of sometimes outraged postings on all the relevant itinerant sites, there is simply no way to convince conspiracy theorists that the evidence for their position is too thin to be convincing, and that the evidence for the traditional view is thoroughly persuasive. Anyone who chooses to believe something contrary to evidence that an overwhelming majority of people find overwhelmingly convincing, whether it involves the fact of the Holocaust, the landing on the moon, the assassination of presidents, or even a presidential place of birth, will not be convinced. Simply will not be convinced. And so, with this book, I do not expect to convince anyone in that boat. What I do hope is to convince genuine seekers who really want